There's our first reference to Star Wars in my little movie. I'm William Larachelle. I'm the writer-director of this. Big Babies, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Abortion. What we're looking at here is a curtain. It's hard to see with the crushed color when we went to the black and white version here. It's not going to be a complete document of the entire film, and especially what happened afterward, but we'll keep focused on this. The curtain now has evoked a musical, but now we see it's a confessional. And that was something that I was kind of jazzed about in the storyboarding phase when I realized I didn't have to show an actual interior of a church. I could just say, all right, this is what are we going to be seeing that we have to see? Just the confessional. We don't even have to show the entire confessional, just evoke it. So this kind of worked out. I think the team really did a good job of creating little props like this bomb with the egg timer, and this kind of works out, having our abortionist first seen in his fetal position, Dave McKay there, and this little transition is something that another thing I'm kind of happy with, just sort of the spin that takes us to the actual home that we're going to be spending most of our time in. And both of these shots were done the first day during the power outage of 2003 in Toronto. You can barely see, this is supposed to be a Moonstruck reference, but I don't know if that really comes across. I don't know if you can really even see the bullet hole in the window there, but that was supposed to be an acknowledgement of all things that kind of gray and negative to do with this subject matter. These interstitials I've come up with it was like in 2004. It was about a year after, not quite a year after, about half a year after I got the actors to come back, because the film, as it stood just as a musical, was so much in its own little world that it was a little harder to just connect with the characters and see them as human beings and have the audience be more and more engaged. So I whipped up this, and the actors did a good job nailing all this dialogue. We went to William F. White, and our cinematographer, John Lindsay, set us up there, and it went really well. Everybody did their own makeup, because our makeup artist actually got into a bit of a car accident just before we were going to do this, and she's okay now, but that was kind of a shock. But anyway, and this is another little bit that I'm amused by, I guess, self-amusement, this idea of the lid, taking us to the lid of the the cake. And, a lot of these camera replacements are deliberately specific, and, we had to check out the location, and every storyboarded shot, the whole thing was storyboarded. I'd have to just crouch in place and see, can I get this shot from here? Can I see this room from the hallway? How can I fake this around? So you can't really see in the background on the counter there very well, but they carefully, Mark Cormier and everybody else, worked on those groceries to make them generic, and this is the sequence. I have to admit, I don't necessarily know why I ended up with this content in terms of just singing as the groceries are being taken out, but it was just the only business I could really come up with to cover the song. It's kind of a counterpoint in the sense that it's something banal being talked about, even though the language is fairly heady, or it's profound, I guess. I don't know. It's posing as profound. I guess that's as close as I get, but this mundane counterpoint of putting away the groceries at least establishes them as a family doing something they might have done many times before. And the core of the story is this dysfunctional, broken family after divorce, and how politics, in a sense, an ideological rift, is what ultimately has kept them apart. With Bertha being a radical right-to-lifer, and Dr. Ian St. Gerard being a radical, well, an abortion provider, I guess. Even though we reveal a little bit more about him later on, I wanted him to still stand in for that kind of thing. This little thing about the form is actually something that's I've made up. I thought it was completely nonsense and satirical, but this kind of issue is talked about today. What are you doing with fetal tissue after an abortion, that kind of thing. But and again, this is certainly all the cast was a really good sport, going along with these crazy rhymes and these issues. Even this, I mean, the whole idea of it is that it's supposed to be this sort of PSA or something like Reefer Madness, in its own sort of world, and just showing what the dangers of extremist views. And this backyard stuff was, I think, on the last day. It was supposed to be an interior, but the backyard looked so good that I decided to just even save time and lighting as well by going outside and doing it here. And I can't imagine how it would have looked as originally planned. Inside it wouldn't have been as good. And here I left some of the color in there for the blood on the sign as part of the gag there. And it might be too dark for some people to even feel comfortable laughing at it, but that's the way it is. And back to these interstitials, discussing what the parents may have had in common. Are there any? Some couples, don't have a heck of a lot in common. They just happen to get together, and the differences pulled them apart eventually. But again, I think everybody did a good job with just their own looking after themselves and the simple lighting. It's, even though it is written and everybody really nailed it. I think Ed, our sound guy, did a good job too, even though there was a lot of noise in the background at the studio, or a little bit every now and then. It still works. It's still very focused, and I like the fact that we are getting kind of a direct address. And unfortunately, I don't know which version of this movie some people have seen. If they've seen it without these interstitials, they might not be engaged with the characters, because it's all kind of aloof and wide, and the characters are meant to just be more symbolic than specific, and representing something rather than just being themselves. So that's always a tricky sort of thing. It's maybe not even be fair to actors in a sense, but here at least we're getting them a chance to be full of life and to be funny in a more normalized sort of way. It's supposed to be like a documentary that might have been done about these people before their final fateful day of the birthday party that went wrong. And yeah, so in this, again, it was just, I think, me and John and the actors, and we didn't involve everybody with it, but anyway, we've got this piece of art, children's art, coming into focus on the fridge. It's in a little stab, even though it's unlikely that years later he would still have his kids' art on the fridge. It's all just part of our little aesthetic and our little conceits, getting as much of the theme out there as possible. I once had a long rambling draft that had it took place in an entire city, Conception Bay, Newfoundland, and one of the town council scenes took place in a children's school. So all these aldermen and all these councillors had to be sitting in children's desks, cramped little children's desks. So I was trying to reinforce this idea of people as kids, people as babies, big babies, that whole sort of thing. And in the sense that people have their own sort of inner child or whatever, and um, this has a few little shots that I like. This one take, she had to actually climb over a counter so that she could get to where Dave is and end up beside him, um, and it just worked out, I think. And um, again, at the end of it, no matter how much charm we think we're putting into it, there's some people who are going to look at it and just say, "What the hell are you thinking, doing a musical about this subject?" But I think either you embrace it or you don't, and I decided to embrace it, and luckily the actors were game, and there wasn't even any real debate about the issues, because it was more about um, getting this timing and getting the goofiness out there, and it's pretty much just following the script and whatever blocking and storyboarding that I've actually prepared. This, the funny thing is, this spider looked a lot better when Mark was originally showing it to us and demonstrating it. And then on the day he was not able to do it, he was not present. So even though it's successful in a sense, getting something to crawl that is not actually crawling, I think it was with magnets or something, it's going to have a little bit of compromise there. But at least I got across this idea. I used to rent a room from a lady who was a nurse, and she engaged me in some debate or discussion about abortion and that kind of thing, and very dismissive of gestation and that kind of thing. But I remember one day she was very careful about picking up a spider and putting it out the window and making sure it was okay, and wouldn't hurt a fly, sort of thing. So I wanted to acknowledge that kind of sensibility, and that doesn't come from nowhere. The idea of the doctor being very concerned about that. And here, this shot of the cake. If this movie had to be only a minute long or a few seconds long, it would probably be this cutting of the cake. And I didn't realize that I unconsciously might have adapted this from The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood, which is the only book of hers that I've read. It was years ago. It wasn't about what I thought it was going to be. It was about a cake, ultimately. And The Naked Gun has a gag about that, too. The queen cake being cut across the neck. But there's a reference to RU486. That was a little bit of a continuity error, too. I didn't even realize that Linda had sniffed the pill with one hand, and then in the wide shot she was using another hand, but somehow we just got by, with the in the cut. And several funny things. Some of these pictures of the egg timer. The continuity girl, Monica, was also one of the art department people. It was very good. She actually pointed out that I didn't have the right time on there, so I had to adjust it. And I was doing continuity, actually, so that's doesn't look good for me. But luckily, I think I'm the kind of person that you can approach and question about things. And luckily, people felt comfortable speaking up on the set, and it saved my bacon a couple of times when I was just, that would be the only reason to take the shot of the take timer is to show the progress of it, and yet I didn't do that, which shows where my head was at. The washroom stuff, I think, was actually in the annex at a different location because it was the day after the power outage, and that part of the town had got its power back. The producer had let us shoot there. I ended up, after the film, the way things played out, and as I don't want to get into detail, but I guess I don't get along with the producer these days. There was a lot of back and forth, and but I think generally everybody had a good experience, and the actual shoot itself, for the most part, was smooth. even if I didn't necessarily know everything that was going on at the time. I tend to be focused on the business at hand, and you kind of hope that other things are falling into place and that what's presented to you is what you think it is. This is one little bit where it might have been too fancy. I don't know. There's a shot of a moon picture on the door to correspond with the idea that she's mooning them, and thus showing a scar that she might have had from in utero surgery. So that was kind of a reach, and stylistically, and certainly not. If you think it's too goofy, it's not the editor; it's me that's is responsible for that. And this, I like, all the little things that are being said in this standoff. It's totally absurd, but so is a lot of the angry mindset that people have, and how that goes overboard in terms of your ideological bent, and so that's definitely intended to play with that, and to show someone's supposedly their respect for life in general can get out of hand. There's a certain purity to it. There gets to be this team versus that team, and that's counterproductive. That sort of binary way of looking at issues that are multi-layered. And here's I think the most crazy song. I once had a Laura Hubert doing a demo of the song. Rusty McCarthy had gotten her and Morgan Ewan to work with him on creating the demo of all the music, which I was able to give the actress to learn the songs, and which was part of the package when I got the Ontario Arts Council to participate, and they gave us a little grant, and that kind of encouraged it in me and made it an official sort of project. So there's Linda's putting all her energy there into this mad song, and this little over-the-shoulder shot of the parents debating and trying to deal with the guilt that their daughter has, and this kind of paradox. I mean, do you want to guilt somebody into feeling so badly about their own choices or whatever that they are actually self-negating or suicidal or whatever? And again, I have kind of a caustic attitude about the idea of freedom as the rationale for just about everything. I think a lot of the time choice is kind of an illusion in life, but that's just me. And this whole idea of the milk souring, I wanted to really, I'm hitting people over the head with all this little symbolism or thematic conceits. The milk has gone bad because the fridge is a little warmer than usual because it's being used as as part of a gestation tank process or a storage facility for this experimental gestation tank. And this was the final day when we finally got to go through this. We didn't have time to do what some people call coverage, and I probably would have been averse to some of that too, because as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't want to punch away at random close-ups of people to break something up necessarily. There's specific times you want to use a close-up, and it might be at a particular cue or whatever. So all of that would have to be coordinated. It wouldn't be something that I'd do after the fact. The way this is, for the most part, I think it plays just fine as just one shot because the actors keep up the energy, and it is a verbal scene. And also, if you start getting into close-ups, you're going to expect a close-up of the gestation tank and the detail of the fetus in there, and that wouldn't necessarily serve anyone very well because it's it's still leaving a lot to your imagination, and I think they did a good job. Michelle Grevich, who's now a great singer and doing very well, she did the initial cut and came up with the effect of the flashing light. And yeah, and then Jason taking over for this black and white version matched a lot of that. And so yeah, and this thing of pulling out from the bomb, or from the the water tank, as the alarm goes off, I think that successfully implies that there was some kind of blast. And there's a little bit of a reference to Tarkin, Governor Tarkin in Star Wars, when Linda puts her finger to her cheek, thinking, just before the explosion. There's also a verbal reference to, I think, the Phantom Menace during one of the interstitials. So that was 3 references to Star Wars in my musical satire of the abortion debate. There's the Ontario Arts Council brand or logo, and I'm very proud that this crazy, unusual project was accepted by them. Roberto Reganello was also kind of a support. He passed away in 2006. But he meant a lot to people at LIFT and the Toronto film community. And here's a little bit of a taste of what things looked like in color. I think the producer at one point, her only comment was, yeah, the colors are really great. And so now I've kind of robbed that of it. I didn't really think color was kind of the point of the movie. And so in this final version, I've just decided to mostly go with the black and white.